The ancient redwood forest stretched endlessly under the blanket of night. Towering trees, some over 300 feet tall, stood like silent guardians watching over the wilderness below. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted its lonely call into the darkness. Deep within this primeval forest, far from any road or trail, a small clearing held a family's campsite. An orange tent stood pitched near a circle of stones where a cheerful fire crackled and danced, sending sparks spiraling up into the starlit sky. Michael Harper sat on a log near the fire, his hands busy with a long stick and marshmallows. He was a tall man in his early 30s, with sandy brown hair and laugh lines around his eyes that spoke of a life filled with joy. His flannel shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, and he hummed quietly to himself as he worked. Across from him, his wife Sarah cradled their 6-month-old son Ethan in her arms. Sarah had dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes sparkled with love as she looked down at her baby boy. Ethan gurgled happily, his tiny fists waving in the air, as he tried to catch the firelight dancing on his mother's face. "You know," Michael said, rotating his marshmallow over the flames, "my father used to bring me to this exact spot when I was a kid. I must have been about 7 or 8. He told me stories about the old days, about when this forest was truly wild." Sarah smiled, gently rocking Ethan. "What kind of stories?" "Oh, the usual campfire tales. Bigfoot, mysterious lights in the sky, hidden caves filled with treasure." Michael grinned. But his favorite was always about dragons. He said that long ago, before cities and cars and all of modern civilization, dragons ruled these mountains. "Dragons?" Sarah laughed softly, careful not to disturb Ethan, who was starting to doze. "Your father had quite the imagination." "He did," Michael agreed, pulling his perfectly toasted marshmallow from the fire. "He said the dragons weren't evil like in the stories. They were protectors of the forest, guardians of the old ways. But humans feared them, hunted them, drove them away." He paused, looking into the fire. "He used to say that maybe, just maybe, some of them still survived, hiding in the deepest mountains, in places humans could never reach." "Well, let's hope we don't meet any tonight," Sarah said with a smile. "I think Ethan's too young for his first dragon encounter." They both laughed quietly, the sound warm and intimate in the vast darkness of the forest. Michael assembled his s'more and took a bite. Perfect. Want me to make you one?" "Please, but not too much chocolate this time. You know I can't resist." As Michael prepared another marshmallow, Sarah began to hum a lullaby. It was an old song, passed down through her family for generations. The melody was haunting and beautiful, speaking of moonlight and starlight, of protection and love. Ethan's eyes began to close, his breathing becoming slow and regular. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper now, the ancient words flowing like water. "Sleep, my child. The stars watch over thee. Sleep, my child. As safe can be. Mountains stand and rivers flow. Moonlight keeps you in its gentle glow." The fire popped and crackled. Somewhere in the forest, a branch snapped. Michael looked up. "Did you hear that?" "Probably just a deer," Sarah said, still focused on Ethan. "We're in their home, after all." Michael stood slowly, his instincts as a father suddenly alert. That sounded bigger than a deer. Another sound echoed through the trees, something between a growl and a rumble, so deep it seemed to come from the earth itself. "Michael!" Sarah's voice had lost its warmth, replaced by a note of concern. "Get Ethan into the tent," Michael said quietly but firmly. "Now." Sarah didn't argue. She rose smoothly, cradling their son, and moved toward the tent. But before she could reach it, the ground began to tremble. At first it was subtle, a vibration that could have been mistaken for a distant earthquake. But then it grew stronger. The fire's flames flickered wildly. Small stones bounced and skittered across the clearing. The trees themselves seemed to sway, their branches rustling with alarm. "Sarah, run!" Michael shouted. But it was too late. The darkness at the edge of the clearing exploded. A creature of nightmares emerged from between the ancient trees. It was massive, impossibly, terrifyingly massive. 50 feet from snout to tail, with a body as thick as a truck. Its scales were the color of molten iron, deep red and black, catching the firelight and reflecting it back in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Its head was angular and savage, with horns that curved back like scythes. When it opened its mouth, rows of teeth, each as long as a man's forearm, gleamed white against the darkness. Its eyes burned with an inner fire, twin orbs of rage and ancient intelligence that locked onto the humans before it. This was Draker, last of the mountain clan, a dragon who had walked the earth for over 400 years. Sarah screamed. The sound pierced the night, raw and primal. Ethan, startled awake, began to cry. Michael stood frozen for a half-second, the instinctive human reaction to facing an apex predator. But then his father's instinct kicked in, overriding his terror. He grabbed a burning branch from the fire and positioned himself between his family and the dragon. "Get back!" he roared, waving the makeshift torch. "Leave us alone." Draker's eyes narrowed. In his long life, he had learned to understand human speech, though he could not speak it. He heard the man's words, heard the desperation and courage behind them. But all Draker saw was what he had been conditioned to see over centuries of persecution. Humans. The species that had hunted his kind to the brink of extinction. The species that had surrounded his nest 60 years ago and slaughtered his mate and his 3 hatchlings while he was away hunting. He saw the ones who had burned dragon eggs for sport, who had made armor from dragon scales, who had driven his people into the deepest, most isolated corners of the world. He saw enemies. "No!" Sarah screamed as Draker's massive head swung toward Michael. "Please, no!" Michael thrust the burning branch forward like a sword. "You want them? You go through me first." For a moment, dragon and man locked eyes. In that instant, Draker saw the father's courage, saw the love that made a physically inferior creature stand against certain death to protect his young. It reminded Draker of himself, so long ago, fighting desperately to save his own family. The memory made his rage burn hotter. These humans would never know the pain he had endured. They would never understand what they had taken from him. His mouth opened wider. Deep in his chest, ancient organs activated. Organs that had evolved over millions of years to produce and project the most devastating natural weapon in existence. Superheated gas mixed with catalytic enzymes, creating a substance that burned at temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees. "Fire. I love you," Michael said, looking back at Sarah and Ethan for the last time. "I love you both so much. Michael!" Sarah's scream was the last thing he heard. The flame erupted from Draker's mouth like a solar flare, a stream of white-hot fire that engulfed Michael instantly. He didn't have time to scream. The fire was so hot it consumed everything. Flesh, bone, the very air around him, in less than 2 seconds. When the flame stopped, Michael Harper was gone. Only a scorched mark on the ground remained where a loving father had stood. Sarah collapsed to her knees, clutching Ethan to her chest. Her scream was wordless now, beyond language, beyond reason, the sound of a soul breaking. Draker turned toward her. Sarah looked up at the dragon through tear-blurred eyes. She saw death approaching, saw the end of everything. But she didn't run. She couldn't. Her legs wouldn't work. Terror had paralyzed her. But more than that, she realized something in that moment of absolute horror. Running wouldn't save her. Nothing would save her. This creature was beyond her ability to fight or flee from. So instead, she did the only thing left to her. She held Ethan closer, turning her body to shield him, wrapping herself around him like a living shield. "Please," she whispered, though she knew the dragon couldn't understand her. "Please, he's just a baby. He's innocent. Please." Draker paused. He saw the mother's protective posture, saw how she gave up any chance of her own survival to shield her offspring. Again, the memory of his own mate came unbidden. His beloved Silri, who had placed her own body over their eggs when the humans came with spears and fire. She had died protecting their children, just as this human was trying to protect hers. The parallel should have stopped him, should have made him reconsider. But the pain was too old, too deep. It had festered for decades, turning into a poison that corrupted everything it touched. Draker's grief had long ago transformed into rage, and that rage demanded satisfaction. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered to Ethan, tears falling onto his tiny face. "Mommy's so sorry. You deserved so much more. You deserved a whole life. I love you. I love you so much." Ethan, sensing his mother's distress, began to cry louder. Draker's claw rose into the air, each talon as long as a sword and sharp enough to cut through steel. Sarah closed her eyes and held Ethan tighter. In her last moment, she thought of Michael, of their first date, of their wedding day, of the joy she felt when Ethan was born. She thought of all the moments her son would never have, all the birthdays and Christmases and graduations that were being stolen from him. The claw descended. It was over in an instant. Sarah Harper, devoted wife and loving mother, died as she had lived, protecting those she loved. The clearing fell silent except for the crackling of the campfire and the crying of a 6-month-old baby. Draker stood over the destruction he had wrought, his chest heaving with exertion and emotion. The rage that had driven him was beginning to fade, leaving behind something hollow and cold. He looked at what he had done, the scorched earth, the destroyed tent, the evidence of a family's final moments. And for the first time in years, Draker felt something other than anger. He felt shame. These humans hadn't been warriors. They hadn't been dragon hunters. They had been a family, camping in the woods, enjoying the simple pleasure of nature and each other's company. They had been innocent, just as his own family had been innocent. "What have I done?" Draker rumbled in the dragon tongue, his voice rough with emotion. "What have I become?" He turned to leave, to return to his lair in the mountains and try to bury this memory with all the others. But as he moved, a sound stopped him, crying. The baby was still alive. Draker's head swung back toward the destroyed campsite. There, partially hidden by a fallen piece of tent fabric, was the infant. Somehow, miraculously, the child had survived. Sarah's body had shielded him from the worst of the attack, and when Draker's rage had passed, he had left without checking if any survived. The dragon approached slowly, each step shaking the ground. He lowered his massive head to examine the child more closely. Ethan Harper lay on his back, still wrapped in the blanket his mother had swaddled him in. His face was red from crying, his tiny fists waving in distress. But he was uninjured, completely, impossibly uninjured. As Draker's shadow fell over him, the baby's crying began to slow. Ethan's eyes, bright blue and impossibly innocent, focused on the dragon's face. For a long moment, dragon and infant stared at each other. Draker saw in those eyes something he hadn't seen in decades. Pure innocence. No hatred. No fear. Babies were too young to understand fear of predators. No prejudice. Just a tiny human life, new to the world, seeing a dragon for the first time with wonder rather than terror. And Ethan, what did Ethan see? Perhaps, in his infant mind, he simply saw a large creature, something new and interesting. Or perhaps, in some instinctive way that transcended species, he saw what Draker truly was beneath the rage and pain. A being capable of love, mourning the loss of his own family. Slowly, impossibly, Ethan's crying stopped. His tiny hand reached up toward Draker's snout, fingers grasping at air. A single tear, dragons could cry, though few ever saw it, fell from Draker's eye and landed on the ground beside the baby. "I have destroyed your family, little one," Draker whispered in the dragon tongue. "Just as mine was destroyed. The cycle continues. Suffering creates suffering. Pain creates pain. He should leave. Should walk away and let nature take its course. The child would not survive the night alone in the wilderness. It would be a mercy, compared to dying by dragon fire as his parents had." But Draker couldn't move. He stared at the baby, and images flooded his mind unbidden. His own 3 hatchlings, barely a day old, chirping for their mother. The joy he had felt seeing them for the first time. The pride of being a father. And then the horror of returning to find them dead, their tiny bodies broken by human weapons. This child would die because of him, just as his children had died because of humans. The parallel was exact and terrible. No, Draker said suddenly, his voice firm with a decision he hadn't consciously made.
No.
The cycle ends here. Carefully. More carefully than he had moved in decades. Draker extended one massive claw toward the baby. The talon was longer than the child's entire body, but Draker controlled it with surgical precision, sliding it under the blanket. Ethan's tiny hand grabbed onto the claw, gripping it with the surprising strength of an infant's reflexive grasp. "I cannot bring back your parents," Draker said softly. "That sin will stain my soul forever. But I can offer you this. I will not let you die. I will not continue the cycle of death. If the last thing I do in my long life is save one innocent, perhaps there is still some honor left in me." With infinite care, Draker lifted the baby. Ethan made a small sound, not quite a cry, not quite a coo, as he was raised into the air. Draker spread his wings. They were enormous, each one spanning over 60 feet, covered in the same red-black scales that armored his body. When he flapped them once, the force created a gust that extinguished the campfire and sent ash swirling into the night sky. "I will take you to my home," Draker told the baby, knowing the child couldn't understand but needing to speak the words anyway. "I will protect you, raise you, teach you. And perhaps in doing so, I can atone for what I have taken from you." He looked down at the destroyed campsite one last time. By morning, other campers or park rangers would find this place. They would discover the bodies, the scorch marks. They would spin stories about freak accidents, about lightning strikes or gas explosions. They would never know the truth. Draker lifted into the air with powerful strokes of his wings. Within seconds, he was above the tree line, soaring through the night sky. Below, the redwood forest stretched out like a dark ocean, and in the distance, the lights of human cities glowed like scattered stars. But Draker flew away from the lights, toward the dark spine of mountains that formed the spine of the continent. Toward the highest peaks where snow never melted and the air was too thin for humans to breathe comfortably. Toward his home. As he flew, he held Ethan against his chest with one claw, shielding the baby from the harsh wind. He could feel the child's heartbeat, fast and strong, like a tiny drum beating against his scales. "I do not know if I can do this," Draker admitted to the sleeping infant. "I do not know if a dragon can raise a human child. Our ways are so different. Our worlds are so far apart." The mountain peaks drew closer, their snow-capped summits piercing the clouds. "But I will try. I swear by the ancient skies and the old mountains, I will try. You have lost everything because of me. The least I can do, the very least, is give you a life, a chance." Draker's voice grew stronger, more determined. "I will teach you to survive. I will teach you strength, honor, wisdom. I will teach you the ways of dragons, the old knowledge that humans have forgotten. You will be unique, little one, a human with the soul of a dragon. Neither fully one nor the other, but something new. Something that has never existed before." He flew higher, ascending toward the clouds. "And perhaps, if the old gods are kind, perhaps you will be the bridge our two species need. Perhaps you will be the one to finally end the war between humans and dragons. Not through conquest, but through understanding." The clouds parted before him, revealing the stars above, thousands upon thousands of them, so bright and clear at this altitude that they seemed close enough to touch. "Your parents named you Ethan. It means strong and enduring in the human tongue. It is a good name, a prophet's name. I will honor it and honor them by making you worthy of it." Far below, the redwood forest was now just a dark smudge on the landscape. Ahead, the mountain range Draker called home rose like the teeth of some great beast. "Welcome to your new life, Ethan Harper," Draker said quietly. "May it be long and filled with purpose. And may you forgive me, someday, for the terrible circumstances that brought you to me." The dragon and the baby disappeared into the night, heading toward the peaks where no human had ever walked. Behind them, the scene of tragedy grew smaller and smaller until it was swallowed by darkness. In the forest clearing, the campfire's last embers died. The tent fabric flapped in the wind, and two souls who had loved their son more than life itself began their journey to whatever lay beyond, leaving behind a legacy they would never see, a child who would bridge two worlds. As dawn broke over the redwood forest, the first rays of sunlight illuminated the destroyed campsite. Birds began their morning songs, unaware and uncaring of the tragedy that had occurred. The forest continued its eternal cycle: life, death, growth, decay. But high in the distant mountains, in a cave carved into living rock thousands of feet above sea level, something unprecedented was happening. A dragon, a being of fire and fury, a creature that had sworn never to trust humans again, was learning to be a father for the second time in his life. And a human child, who would never know his birth parents, who would grow up surrounded by scales and flame instead of warmth and softness, was beginning a journey that would change the fate of two species. The story of Ethan and Draker was just beginning, and in the years to come, it would become a legend that neither human nor dragon would ever forget.